Hi, Caroline. How are you?
I'm doing fine, JV. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm so grateful that you are able to make some space to talk to us during our all church Sunday school here at UCC.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, you're welcome. So we have, known each other for a while, and UCC has partnered up with Week of Compassion quite a lot in the past. And I love that partnership, and I'm excited for the ways that it will continue to blossom and grow in the future. But I don't know if everyone knows exactly what you do at Week of Compassion. So could you just take a couple of minutes and explain your role and what you do?
Sure, yeah. Well, we are a very small staff. We have 3 full-time staff people and 1 part-time administrative assistant. So we kind of all do everything. But officially, my title is Associate Director for Domestic Disaster Response. So my focus is in connecting communities who have experienced disasters with resources they need to facilitate their own recovery. And sometimes those resources are financial through our grant programs, both for local disciple congregations and households, and then also for long-term recovery groups, community groups that are leading their communities in rebuilding. But it's also connecting the resources of people and information and opportunities. So connecting disciple congregations and individuals with opportunities to be involved both in their immediate community or in places across the country. And we do that work in partnership with Disciples Volunteering. And I also work with congregations to do disaster preparedness to hopefully position our congregations better for when a disaster happens, because it's if and not when, so that we can be in a position to care for our neighbors and to protect our own assets and, more importantly, our own people.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, what some folks might not know is when we had a group down in Texas City last summer, you came and talked to us, and the mission station there was also in partnership with Week of Compassion through Disciples Volunteering. So
yeah, I had a blast hanging out.
It was fun. Some of our folks might recognize you from that trip. So, when we think of disaster response, a lot of times the first thing that comes to mind are, hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, earthquakes, flooding. But COVID is a disaster in itself. It's a crisis that we are experiencing in our country and globally. So could you talk a little bit about the ways that Week of Compassion has responded to this crisis, to this disaster that we are facing as a society?
Yeah, absolutely. In so many ways, a pandemic falls into the same boxes that a disaster recovery does in terms of, the need to find partners, and that there are physical needs for our neighbors that we need to figure out logistics to get resources to them. There are some of the same emotional responses. I often, after disasters, use a visual that looks kind of like a roller coaster, and it's the emotional response that communities go through after a community crisis. And we're seeing those same kinds of patterns happening through this pandemic. Complicated a little bit because it's ongoing, and so we keep, jumping back to the beginning of the cycle each time we have to shut things back down, or when we have to change the plan on whether we're going to open schools. Like every time we do that, we kind of restart the cycle in some ways. But a lot of the partnerships and lessons learned from natural disasters kind of map onto this COVID experience. In other ways, it's completely different. There's no house that needs to be rebuilt, which is kind of our wheelhouse normally. And there are so many new players involved because you have public health officials and medical professionals, and a lot of the ways we typically respond to disasters are dependent on physical presence. We show up for one another to help muck out the house or sort the donations or do
Right.
whatever, and we can't do that.
Yeah, the Ministry of Presence has taken a completely different look in this time of when we are like, the best way that you can minister for and care for one another is to make sure you keep that physical distance, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I know that we give compassion,
Yeah.
you know, pray, stay, give, you know, but it's very different.
Normally the stay doesn't feel quite so long. However, we did recognize early on that we had mechanisms for providing resources to people and connecting people to money and food and information. And so we really leaned into that aspect of our work domestically. So we have 2 grant programs that are still operating for COVID relief. One is for households experiencing extreme financial hardship, and one is for congregations that are operating feeding programs, either having to ramp up a program that they already had because the demand has increased so much, or creating whole new ministries kind of on the fly to respond to emerging needs in their communities. So both of those grant opportunities are still operating. And then we've been doing lots of informational connections. So I listen in on FEMA updates and updates from various other partners that we have across the country around what food assistance might be available that we could help connect congregations to, what other kinds of programs are operating. Early on, it was a lot of trying to help congregations navigate the CARES Act in its multiple iterations.
Yes.
And so we've been doing that domestically. Internationally, there is sort of a more seamless transition. Because so many of our partners were already operating in spaces of sort of food security and water sanitation and hygiene. And those things very easily translate into this moment. And so we've really focused on trying to support communities that were already sort of on the edge of being food insecure, or were making progress towards food security, but have been really detrimentally impacted by the pandemic. And then places where access to water for hand washing is not a given, or access to soap is not always an easy feat for families. And so we've really focused in those areas, and also partnered with several longstanding partners around the needs of refugees. You can imagine the density of a refugee camp and the lack of resources that tend to be the reality for refugees, that it could be a hotbed for outbreaks. And so trying to provide some food security and water and sanitation supplies there as well.
Can you, I don't know if everyone is familiar with the terms food security and food insecurity. Can you talk a little bit more about that and kind of explain it and what it looks like and what we're working
with? If you have confidence that you will have enough food to eat in a day, you're food secure. That's sort of the most basic definition. And we have many families in the United States who live on the edge of food insecurity, where they are not sure if they will get enough food and enough nutritious food in a day. The kind of next step of that is crisis hunger. So food insecurity is, you may not know if you'll get 3 nutritious, sufficient meals in a day. You may sometimes have to skip meals. You're not really sure where your next meal is going to come from. Then we have the next level of crisis hunger, and that's when you really have children at risk for stunting and malnutrition. You have the risk for starvation and even death from lack of food. And a recent Oxfam report came out In 2009, we already had seen an increase in the number of people globally who were food insecure. At the end of 2019, 821 million people were food insecure. And
821 million.
Globally, 821 million. And of those, 149 million were experiencing crisis hunger. Estimates from the World Food Program have indicated that we might see up to 270 million people in crisis hunger by the end of this year. So that's what, 45-ish% increase in this year. Now, intervention could bring that number down. We may see advances in vaccination or other ways to intervene on the pandemic side, or intervention on provision of food. But as things are going, the World Food Program estimates were 270 million people by the end of this year.
That number just is so shocking. I mean, it's not shocking, it's just it's heartbreaking, you know. I can't remember who I was reading something, I don't know, at some point during all of this, and Tarrant Area Food Bank here in Fort Worth has been doing amazing work, and they've had some different pop-ups where people can just go and on Saturdays for a long time and get food. But I think someone posted something or shared a photo that they had posted, and it just said, wow, look at this great crowd that's turned out to get food. And in my mind, I was like, I would love it if no one had to show up to get food, you know, but instead it's just this huge line of folks at the Cowboy Stadium or, you know, at Dickies Arena. And I'm like, I think the amount of people that show up is not something we want to celebrate, you know?
Right. On the one hand, you're glad that people are accessing.
Yes, exactly.
But the fact that so many people need to access those resources, I think, is an indictment on us as a society, and perhaps us as a global community, that the reason we're seeing that massive increase in food insecurity and in crisis hunger is not just the pandemic. It's the pandemic layered upon all of these other things. It's, you know, layered upon conflict that has displaced people, and a climate crisis, and you know, an industrialized food system that is very vulnerable to changes in supply chain. You know, we don't think about all of those layers that impact access to food globally. That are pre-existing issues that just get exacerbated.
Yeah, and you wonder, you know, some of these multiple layers and these issues that have played into our food system, you know, for years, maybe the light that has been shown will bring awareness and a better understanding and some change. I mean, I guess I hope for that.
Yeah. I do too. I've seen some things going around, you know, questioning, is it really the role of our school to meet all of these other social needs? That if the reason we need to send kids back to school is so that they can get 3 meals a day, doesn't that say something else about where our priorities are as a community? And I have just been really grateful in the midst of all of that heartbreaking news and that sort of reckoning that we're having to do as a culture. I have been encouraged by the ways that churches have continued to show up and have said, okay, well, then we're going to expand our reach, and we're going to expand our love for our community in really tangible ways. And that brings me hope in the midst of all of the chaos and all of the bad news.
You definitely see the divine at work through these faith communities.
Absolutely.
And one thing I love about Week of Compassion is how you are able to offer some education, some resources, and also always invite us to partner on your work and your mission. And so what are ways that we can do that now. I know there's an exciting special offering that is starting tomorrow, Monday, August the 10th. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? We saw a sneak peek in the video, but can you talk about that for a little bit?
Absolutely. In recognizing that the needs for this pandemic, especially needs around food security, are continuing to grow, we have been encouraging congregations through this latter part of August to take designated offerings for our COVID-19 relief fund. You can find more information about how we're responding, find stories, find prayers and activities for your kids, and all kinds of things on our website, which I will drop in the chat feed.
Yes, and we'll also have a link on our UCC website as well, where people can go and learn more information.
Yeah. The theme for the campaign for this designated offering is grow your compassion, and we're taking the parable of the mustard seed, and when the layered and complex issues of this moment seem so big, that we can cling to this promise that our faith will grow to meet the challenge, and that when we join our generosity with our faithfulness and with the movement of the Holy Spirit, that we can grow our compassion to meet real needs. And I love in the image of that parable that the birds come and nest in the branches, that they come to the bush because it has delicious seeds that they can eat, but then they find a sort of a place to rest and a home and security in the branches. And so we are kind of taking that parable as our inspiration for this offering, that we can hopefully for a few of our neighbors provide that kind of sustenance and coverage during this time.
Yeah, well, I love that. You know, things can be overwhelming, but when we remember that parable, it's like, but it just takes just a mustard seed. And then God does amazing things. So thank you for spending some time with us this morning, for being available to talk via the chat. We will have the information on our website and ways that you can give. We'll share that in the Facebook chat and email that out to everyone. But thanks again for joining us today and just telling us a little bit more about what you do, what you are doing, and how we can partner in that work. So,
well, thank you. UCC is such a faithful partner, and this is really your ministry. I get the privilege of doing this ministry every day for my job, but it is a calling of the whole church and a privilege and ministry of the whole church that we get to do it together. So thanks for being part of it.
It is. Thank you. We'll see you sometime soon.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Take care.
Bye-bye.